Welcome back, soldiers. You've stepped once again into the shadows of mob truth. If you're new here, hit subscribe and join the family, where we uncover the real stories of the underworld, episode by episode. This is Mob Truth, the only channel bringing you raw history, no myths, no Hollywood gloss. Just the rise and fall of the men who built empires in the alleys, casinos, and courtrooms of America. Tonight's story is about the man they called the Brain, the gambler who turned crime into a business, the mastermind behind the 1919 World Series fix, Arnold Rothstein. Long before Lucky Luciano or Meyer Lansky rose to power, it was Rothstein who taught them the game. A mobster without a gun who used money, gambling, and influence to control the streets of New York. But power built on chance always comes with a price. Arnold Rothstein didn't look like the kind of man who would change the underworld forever. He wasn't a gunman. He wasn't a street enforcer. He was quiet, calculated, and always dressed like a Wall Street banker. But behind that calm face, Rothstein was rewriting the rules of organized crime. Born in 1882 to a wealthy Jewish family in New York, Rothstein was different from the street kids who clawed their way up the ranks. He had money, connections, and education. But more importantly, he had a mind sharper than anyone else in the game. People called him the Brain for a reason. While other mobsters fought bloody turf wars, Rothstein played a different game. He saw crime as a business. Where others saw risk, he saw opportunity. And it all started in smoky back rooms just like this. Private clubs, hotels, and gambling dens where politicians, businessmen, and gangsters rubbed shoulders. Rothstein sat at the center of it all. In these rooms, he learned the art of influence. He didn't need muscle. His weapons were money, charm, and information. He would lend cash to desperate men, bankroll political campaigns, and place bets so big they could shake an entire casino. If someone owed him, he owned them. And Rothstein never forgot a debt. The young generation of mobsters noticed him. Names that would later dominate the mafia, Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, and even Frank Costello, all watched Rothstein carefully. To them, he wasn't just a gambler. He was a teacher, a mentor who showed them how crime could be structured, organized, and most of all, profitable. New York at the time was bursting with opportunity for men like Rothstein. Prohibition was around the corner. The city was drowning in speakeasies, and fortunes were being made overnight. But Rothstein didn't wait for the law to change. He built gambling houses, loan shark operations, and drug connections stretching from Europe to America. Still, it wasn't violence or smuggling that made him famous. It was his brain. In an era when most gangsters lived fast and died young, Rothstein kept his distance from the blood. He controlled from the shadows, the man behind the curtain. Every move was a calculation, every risk measured, and soon his reach extended far beyond the back rooms of New York. Because Arnold Rothstein wasn't just looking to beat the house. He was about to fix the biggest game in America, the 1919 World Series. Baseball wasn't just a sport in 1919. It was America's heartbeat. The White Sox were kings of the diamond, heroes to working families who scraped together pennies just to watch them play. To the public, the game was clean, sacred. But Arnold Rothstein looked at it differently. He saw baseball not as a religion, but as an opportunity. If he could control the outcome of the World Series, he wouldn't just make money. He would prove that anything in America could be bought, even the national pastime. The players were vulnerable. Charles Comiskey, the Sox owner, treated his men like dirt. They were the best in the league, but underpaid and bitter. That's where the whispers started. Rothstein's money, funneled through gamblers and fixers, reached the clubhouse. The deal was dangerous but simple. The White Sox would throw the series against the Cincinnati Reds. In return, each man who played along would pocket more than an entire season's salary. 8 players said yes. 8 men willing to sell their souls for Rothstein's cash. From the first pitch, fans knew something was wrong. Eddie Cicotte, one of the best pitchers in baseball, suddenly couldn't find the strike zone. Fielders dropped easy balls. Runners stumbled on base paths. The Reds, an average team at best, looked like world champions. In back rooms across New York and Chicago, gamblers cleaned up. Millions of dollars changed hands. And at the center of it all, never touching the field, never lifting a bat, sat Arnold Rothstein, calm, silent, the man who had bought the World Series. When the scandal finally broke, America was outraged. Newspapers screamed betrayal. The great game was poisoned, its heroes exposed as frauds. The players were dragged into court, jeered by the same crowds that once worshipped them. But Rothstein? He walked away untouched. The players took the blame, the gamblers vanished, and Rothstein kept the profits, untouchable as ever. To the world, the name Arnold Rothstein was now infamous. To the underworld, he was a legend, the man who proved that even America's pride had a price. The whispers became headlines. The headlines became fury. And soon America's heroes, the Chicago White Sox, were dragged into the harsh light of justice. The courtroom was a circus. Reporters packed shoulder to shoulder, pencils scratching furiously across notepads. Photographers jostled for position, their bulbs flashing in blinding bursts. The public jammed every seat, and those who couldn't get inside pressed their faces against the windows, desperate to witness the fall of baseball's idols. The players sat stiff in their suits, a row of nervous men who once commanded cheers from tens of thousands. Now every eye in America was fixed on their shame. Eddie Cicotte, the veteran pitcher, admitted he had been promised $10,000 to throw games, money he claimed he never fully received. Shoeless Joe Jackson, perhaps the most famous name in the scandal, muttered that he had taken $5,000, but insisted he still played his heart out. His words rang hollow. Fans spat his name in disgust. Once a hero, now branded a cheat. The questions fired at them were relentless. Did you accept the money? Who approached you? Was Rothstein behind it? Each answer only fueled more suspicion. Witnesses contradicted each other. Some admitted to meetings in smoky hotel rooms where envelopes of cash changed hands. Others claimed they never saw a dime. The truth twisted and shifted like smoke, impossible to grasp. The crowd jeered. Men who once brought pride to Chicago now sat condemned by their own fans. Women cried in the gallery, unable to reconcile their baseball heroes with the corruption being laid bare. And while the trial dragged on in Chicago, one name floated in every whisper: Arnold Rothstein, the brain, the man who bankrolled the fix. Yet he was never in the room. His lawyers kept him out of reach. His fixers and middlemen vanished into thin air. Evidence evaporated. The newspapers smelled blood. Headlines screamed across every front page. Black Sox scandal erupts. 8 men out. Baseball's shame. Every household in America read the words. At breakfast tables, fathers slammed their coffee mugs in disgust. In barbershops and saloons, men cursed the players for betraying the nation's pastime. On street corners, boys tore down the posters of their fallen idols. The scandal wasn't just news, it was heartbreak. For months, the courtroom battles raged. Lawyers argued, witnesses recanted, and juries struggled to decide who was guilty of what. When the verdict finally came, it shocked the nation. Not guilty. The players walked free. They had beaten the criminal charges, but their careers were finished. Baseball's commissioner declared them banned for life. No appeals, no second chances. Their names would be forever marked with betrayal. And Rothstein? He remained untouched. He never faced a jury. He never heard the clanging of a cell door. To the public, he was a shadow. To the underworld, he was a king who had pulled off the greatest gamble of all, fixing the World Series and walking away clean. In smoky back rooms across New York, men nodded with respect. Rothstein had shown them that real power wasn't carried in a gun. It was hidden in influence, in money, in the ability to bend even America's most sacred traditions to your will. The Black Sox players lost their futures. Rothstein gained immortality. To history, the scandal remains baseball's darkest hour. To organized crime, it was Rothstein's masterpiece, the proof that anything could be bought if you had the brains to pay the right price. Baseball in 1919 was more than just a game. It was America's pride, its innocence, its religion, and the Chicago White Sox were its saints. Shoeless Joe Jackson, Eddie Cicotte, Buck Weaver. On paper, they were unstoppable, but the games told a different story. From the first pitch, something was wrong. Eddie Cicotte, the veteran ace, was known for pinpoint control. But that day, his pitches sailed high, floated low, or found the middle of the plate. Reds batters hit him like they were taking batting practice. Some fans blamed nerves. Others blamed the weather. But gamblers in the stands, men who had Rothstein's money on the line, smiled. This was no accident. The Sox fielders fumbled easy ground balls. Outfielders took long routes to routine catches. Throw after throw missed its target. To the casual eye, it looked like mistakes. To the sharp eye, it looked like betrayal. In the dugout, Buck Weaver burned with anger. He refused to take part in the scheme. He played his heart out, diving for balls, hustling on the bases. But one honest man couldn't carry 8 who had already sold their souls. Then came Shoeless Joe Jackson, one of the greatest hitters of his time. Kids collected his cards, fathers swore his name at the barbershop. But in the series, Joe swung late, struck out often, and played defense like his legs were tied. When he missed a routine play in left field, the crowd gasped. Boys in the bleachers stared in disbelief. Their idol had crumbled before their eyes. Game after game, the pattern repeated. Reds batters ran wild. Sox fans shouted from the stands, demanding answers. "Come on, play ball," one man cried. Another muttered, "They're throwing it." By Game 8, it was over. The Cincinnati Reds were champions. The White Sox had fallen, and baseball itself was stained. But the scandal didn't end on the field. Soon, the whispers became accusations, and accusations became headlines. The Black Sox scandal exploded across America's newspapers. Baseball's shame. 8 men out. The fix is in. The country was furious. In Chicago, men spat the names of their once beloved players. In Cincinnati, victory tasted hollow. In New York, Rothstein kept his distance, smiling quietly as the headlines screamed. He had turned America's pastime into his personal payday. The players were dragged into court, but the verdict that shocked the nation was simple: not guilty. The newspapers printed it in bold letters. White Sox players are not guilty. On the surface, they had escaped prison, but in reality, their lives were over. Baseball's new commissioner, Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, laid down the law, banned for life. Shoeless Joe Jackson, Eddie Cicotte, Lefty Williams, Swede Risberg, Happy Felsch, Chick Gandil, Fred McMullen, Buck Weaver, their names carved into history as traitors to the game. Families read the morning papers in silence. Fathers slammed coffee cups in disgust. Mothers shook their head. Children asked questions no parent could answer. In every corner of America, the betrayal stung. And Rothstein, his name never appeared in the verdict. His lawyers kept him away. His fixers vanished. Witnesses changed their stories. The brain walked free. While the players faced ruin, Rothstein sat in New York, counting winnings, untouchable, untarnished. The scandal that should have destroyed him only made him stronger. Men in smoky back rooms nodded in respect. If Rothstein could buy the World Series, what couldn't he buy? For baseball, 1919 was the darkest year. For Arnold Rothstein, it was his masterpiece. He had turned America's game into proof of a single truth. Anything, even heroes, even history, could be bought. The pieces begin to fall. By the early 1920s, Rothstein's reach stretched far beyond baseball. He was in politics, real estate, horse racing, narcotics. If there was a dollar to be made, he had a hand in it. His name carried weight in every backroom from Broadway to Wall Street. But with power came enemies. Rival gamblers grumbled that Rothstein set the odds so high no one else could win. Politicians whispered that he was too visible, too arrogant. And young gangsters, the very men he mentored, began wondering how long they wanted to sit behind his shadow. At the gambling tables, Rothstein was as calm as ever. But the tension was there, just under the surface. Every move was watched, every deal questioned. And slowly, the pieces on the board began to shift against him. Take George "Hump" McManus, one of Rothstein's old associates, a gambler with a short fuse and a taste for cards. McManus owed Rothstein money, not a small debt, but tens of thousands. And Rothstein was not a man to forgive debts. He pressed quietly at first, then harder. McManus swore he would pay, But in gambling halls and smoke-filled parlors, he started muttering, "The brain thinks he owns us all. One day he'll find out different." Meanwhile, Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano, Rothstein's prize students, were making their own names. Luciano ran prostitution and bootlegging rackets. Lansky organized gambling rings with machine-like efficiency. They admired Rothstein, but they also learned from his mistakes. Don't sit too high above the crowd. Don't make yourself the obvious target. Rothstein's empire was vast, but it had no walls. He didn't run soldiers the way Capone did. He ran networks, money lines, influence, and when those lines frayed, there was nothing to shield him. In 1928, the cracks became fractures. Rothstein walked into a poker game at the Park Central Hotel. The stakes were astronomical, over $300,000 on the table. He played cool as always, but by the end of the night, he was deep in debt. Some said the game was crooked. Others swore Rothstein simply had a rare streak of bad luck. Either way, the whispers spread fast. The brain owes money. The king has fallen. He refused to pay. He told friends, "I don't settle debts from rigged games." It was arrogance, but also principle, and it lit the fuse. On the streets, men whispered Rothstein's name with a different tone now. Not awe, but calculation. A king refusing to pay his debts was a king inviting his enemies to test him. The toppled chess piece was no longer just a metaphor. It was a warning. McManus, stung by humiliation, felt his moment had come. Associates closed ranks, some circling Rothstein, others drifting toward rivals. Even Luciano and Lansky, loyal as they were, kept a cautious distance. They could see what was coming. Rothstein still carried himself with icy confidence, walking through Manhattan in his tailored suits, nodding politely to reporters who hounded him. But in back rooms, in whispers, the question grew louder. Was Arnold Rothstein still untouchable, or had the brain finally played himself into a corner? Every great game ends with a checkmate. Rothstein's board was collapsing piece by piece, and the men who once admired him were already planning their next moves. The downfall at Park Central. On the night of November 4th, 1928, the velvet curtains of the Park Central Hotel's banquet hall hid more than music and laughter. Inside, Rothstein was back in his element. Poker tables, whiskey glasses, the faint haze of smoke drifting under chandeliers. But the mood was different. Men whispered. Eyes followed him not with awe, but with calculation. The unpaid debt from the infamous poker game hung around his neck like a noose. Over $300,000, money Rothstein claimed he didn't owe. To him, the game had been crooked. To everyone else, it didn't matter. In his world, a man's word was his currency, and Rothstein's word was starting to rot. George "Hump" McManus, the gambler who organized that cursed game, was in the room too. Red-faced, pacing, muttering that Rothstein was a thief who hid behind silk suits. McManus had always been volatile, but now he was desperate. A debt unpaid was a wound left open, and Rothstein had left it bleeding too long. At 10 p.m., shots shattered the air. Patrons screamed. Glass exploded. Chairs toppled. When the smoke cleared, Arnold Rothstein lay slumped, clutching his abdomen, blood soaking through his immaculate gray suit. The brain, the man who fixed the World Series, who taught Luciano and Lansky, who bankrolled half of New York's underworld, had been reduced to just another casualty on the city's violent streets. Witnesses claimed they saw McManus storm out, face twisted in rage. Others swore they saw strangers fleeing through the kitchen. In true Rothstein fashion, the truth was wrapped in shadows. Even as he lay in Bellevue Hospital, pale and gasping, detectives pressed him for answers. Arnold, who did this? Name your shooter. Give us the man. Rothstein looked them dead in the eye, lips barely moving. I won't talk. It was the final move of a gambler who had played every angle. To the police, he left silence. To his protege, he left a lesson. Loyalty to the code, even in death. George McManus was arrested, charged with the murder. The trial drew headlines, the public desperate for justice. But the jury found him not guilty. Just like the players of the Black Sox scandal years before, the law slipped away, and the truth vanished into smoke. Rothstein's funeral drew a crowd of thousands. Bootleggers, bookmakers, politicians. Even judges and cops came to pay respects. Luciano himself would later say, "Arnold showed us how to make real money. He was the teacher. We were just students." But for all the flowers and whispered prayers, the message was clear. The brain had finally been checkmated. His empire crumbled, his debts unpaid, his killers free. Yet in death, his legend only grew. For the mobsters who followed, Rothstein wasn't just another casualty. He was the blueprint, the man who proved brains could be deadlier than bullets. The story of Arnold Rothstein ends not in triumph, but in shadows. The brain who outplayed baseball, politics, and the underworld fell the same way he lived, with secrets, debts, and silence. But his legacy never left the streets. Every mobster that followed, Luciano, Lansky, Costello, carried his lessons. Power wasn't just about bullets, it was about brains, strategy, and the courage to make the world your chessboard. And if you made it this far, soldier, you're one of us now. Subscribe to Mob Truth and step into the family. Every week we bring you the rise and fall of the men who built the underworld. To our new soldiers, welcome to the crew. And remember, in this family, loyalty is everything.